just a word with wings for us. Again and again he said, we come to it. And we always puzzled when we'll come to it. And then on the last day, before we parted, he suddenly, without anybody expecting it, started talking about group analysis. And then in a most precise way, he put together his ideas about group analysis as we never had heard. And we were sat there with open mouths and really were frightened and thought, well, we should have had a recording machine or something like that. And he was just sitting there and the ideas were coming out of him. There was nothing written. It was just coming and coming. Suddenly he sat there, was looking up. Then he started again. So that was completely relaxed. And then in the end we asked him, we were very silent in the end. We were so impressed. And then after a while we were so enthusiastic and asked him, could we have a copy of that? And he was quite astonished and said, of what? Did I do something important? And he was really puzzled by it. And then he said, yes, maybe I write something about it. And then he wrote something in GAPEC at these days, but it was something completely different.
I can never forget the way in which he captivated people when he spoke. It would be like a sort of tremendous atmosphere of attentiveness, even though quite often afterwards people would say, well, what was he talking about? The fact was that one was captivated. He had a mesmerizing effect. He held people's attention with great respect.
I wonder whether Foulkes, because he moved from therapist to teacher to friend, whether he himself did not prepare his close followers that he was going to die someday. And so I think the older ones, and I don't mean in age, the ones who've known him longer, have never faced him dying and his death. And how much is that to do with him, that he left things unfinished, which one always does, but not dealing with separation?
Some of us are talking about this and saying that we really ought to bring this up. That was some of us who were members of the last group, the famous 2-year group that ended with his death. That's Malcolm, Lionel, Dennis, myself, and others. And of course Foulkes was not the same then as he had been earlier on when I was in analysis with him much younger, but it was still for me an enriching experience. And the day before the scheduled last meeting of the group, suddenly in the middle of a session he stopped speaking and said something like, I can't go on, or whatever, something like that, and died just suddenly like that. For the 7 of us, one had gone away that week, the 7 of us who were in the room, this was, as you can imagine, a most awful experience. He was quickly, the whole situation was quickly taken in charge by a young psychiatrist called Calusi, who was not a psychoanalyst and not a psychotherapist. And he was none of us were a proper doctor, so he took charge of this, and he was thrown on a settee, and the various men did various different things, mouth-to-mouth respiration, pummeling his chest, and all the things that you're supposed to do. And I was told to feel his wrist to see if there was a pulse, and that was 5 doctors in the room trying to attend to him, and he was dead, and there was nothing that anybody could do. He was dead.
What better thing than to die in a group,
For him, yes.
Exactly.
Not for the group.
Not for the group, but I think my point is not being addressed, that he was quite old. Why did his group not ever think he might die? I mean, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, or maybe a little bit of Jung would have helped, because Jung does help you to face, life is finite.
There was no certainty he would live the lifetime of the group, but like everything else in life, we just assumed that it could happen, that it could be all right. And we joined the group in the expectation it would run the 2 years, which it did, except for one session. What I find so shocking, and I use the word shocking, is the way we dealt with it after that, because after all, that session was chaotic and catastrophic and painful. And then the next week, we all came together again. And we said potty things, stupid things like, you know, how marvellous that we've got this one session together after he died so that we can deal with it. What a stupid thing to say. And that was the kind of tenor of our meeting. Well, we did kind of talk about it, but in the most superficial and vague way. And we never arranged any subsequent meetings together. None of us. We didn't even talk about it between ourselves. And that's the way we didn't deal with it.
In relation to koinonia, it seems to me that one of the difficulties that we had was that it was not a median group, it was not a group devoted to koinonia, and yet it might have seemed like that. I think what was missing perhaps was some of the bite and some of the deathliness of a group analysis as it can actually be experienced. Now, Foulkes died. My recollection is that we never really prepared ourselves or worked very adequately with the ending. Foulkes perhaps might have had difficulty because he wasn't sure how long he was going to last. But in a very dramatic way, I mean, some people do know this, that when he died, 2 days after his cremation, my retina detached. I recognized many of the things which Werner spoke about earlier in this mixture of closed eye attentiveness when it seemed that he might be sleeping, and then on the other hand this very detailed questioning of what people meant by something. So there's a curious tension between the inactivity and the focused questioning. Now that helps me actually to understand really some very important characteristic of his, which in my mind at that time, when he, in the group in which he died, I thought of as a sort of, I really thought that he wasn't with it quite often, and then when he was questioning, I thought he was too with it. Now, my personal disappointment, which may or may not be other people's disappointment, was dealt with by not being able to express that directly, because I think I was partly concerned about him being old and possibly frail, and not wanting to attack him because I had tremendous regard for him. But it is interesting from my point of view, my psychopathology is probably not of great interest to other people, that the detached retina came at the point on my retina where I saw him drop dead and I had a mean thought. Now, what have we done with our mean thoughts? Have they played a part in our reluctance to talk about the disappointment, as well as the pain of ending? I think we've had great difficulty in expressing a multitude of feelings about his death, which don't detract and wouldn't detract, I think, from our tremendous love and admiration of him.
He always said, don't stick your neck out and you lead from behind and all that sort of thing, but in the end, it got him. So in a way, you might say he was killed in a group and he didn't want to go. Why could we not appreciate the fact of his vulnerability?
He was aware of his own frailty, and we often talked about his forthcoming death. We didn't know how soon it would be, but we talked about it quite freely, which some people find surprising. But that last occasion, we drove through the park, and it was it was terribly hot at the time, really unusually hot for London. And he said, oh, why didn't we decide to stop this group at the end of June? Why did we decide to go on to mid-July?
Someone came over from Germany, Michael Möller, Professor Möller, and he was totally in love with Foulkes, actually, he still is. And he wanted Foulkes to come and set up a group analytic course in Germany for German psychoanalysts. And Foulkes said to him, according to Möller, and he did not say, I haven't time, he said, it's too late. But there is the second generation. And then he pointed to Adele and me and other German-speaking trainees of his. And in fact, sorry, we took it over and we're still running it. But I remember this phrase, not, I can't do it, I'm too busy, I haven't time, but he said, it's too late.
You know, as an analyst, you tend to make pilgrimages to Golders Green Crematorium, you know, to assist at the death of your colleagues and so on. And I remember after one such gloomy affair, strolling with him and looking at the beautiful lawn and the plots where people are buried. I'm not sure if James Anthony was with us, and he was looking to see, you know, where he was going to be at one time, under which tree, and thought it would be rather nice to be there. So he also had that rather calm attitude towards it, the inevitability.
The contrast between Freud's urn, surrounded by all these things, and the ashes of Foulkes, where there is a tree planted. And I took then a leaf of this tree, and I am carrying it on my conductor's driving license.
Oh, yeah.
There is a very powerful sense of guilt that is still there, that hasn't yet been, as it were, assimilated.
We have still some minutes. Could you say something about his attitude or his meaning about institutionalization of group analysis, about the institutes, the group analysis society? There was nothing said about that. I think it's an important point in it.
I can say something about that. The idea to run an institute of group analysis came not from Foulkes himself. It came from those of us who'd started the teaching courses and found that there was demand for people to do advanced courses and to continue. And then we thought we ought to really consider creating a profession of people who'd gone through what we then called a qualifying course. Now, Foulkes was rather against the institutionalization of teaching in that way, I think also because it took away his personal influence.
Foulkes was one of the key figures for making an international association of group psychotherapy since the beginning. And he was very gentle. I have been a little bit a go-between Beerer, Foulkes, Lebovici, and Marino. And he was always smoothing the things and helping to build an international association. That was a very big contribution.
A society can center around a creative, original person. So the Group Analytic Society surrounded Michael. He enjoyed it. It was where he was at home. An institute belongs to a group of people. And you have to set up curricula, you have to set up training standards, you have to negotiate with the authorities, and so on. He didn't like that. In a sense, you could say that, to use Battegay's terms, the narcissistic group self could extend itself into the network, because in the network he could respond to everybody and they all related to him at the center of the network. Once you have an institute, it's diffused, it's shared with the group. And I think he found that something that was a bit antithetical to his own needs and personality.
I am very glad that this topic came up because, and it's confirmed my hypothesis that some way the institutionalization of teaching in the Group Analytic Society coincides with the creation, for me the most creative idea of Foulkes, that was the International Panel on Correspondence. And it coincides in time, and I think that there are two outlooks completely different. And well, the last split, for instance, between the society and the institute, or not a split, not living together any longer, it represents something that has to be dealt in this society, and I am very glad of this, what you did here for us, and for this society, by being therapeutic and recreating something. I think we have done a job, a pending job today here.
talk about my vivid and happy memories of Michael Foulkes and the gratitude that I owe him for changing my whole professional life. I had trained in group analysis at the Tavistock in 1952 to 1954, stimulating but also very frustrating. Only through Foulkes did I learn what a group and group cohesion and group solidarity meant. I met himself first in 1968 after a group therapy congress in Vienna and a colloquium that he held with Eric Byrne, a lively discussion at a lovely Baroque castle turned hotel and restaurant. I then, in 1969, took in the first number of Group Analysis. I am the fortunate owner of the complete set of Group Analysis from this first number to the present day. In 1971, I published a work on intensive group therapy with patients of a few German doctors away from home. This may have also stimulated Foulkes' interest in training away from home in so-called block training. The away from home training has been going on, and actually the first people who started these block trainings all took part in a very interesting and lovely workshop in my house in Alt-Aussee in Germany, where Foulkes himself came and did a supervision group, and Jim Hume, Lionel Krieger, and Harold Kay conducted small groups. This was, I think, Foulkes' first re-entry to Germany and Austria, and speaking also German, though the workshop was, of course, in English. The other great activities that I took part in were the second colloquium in summer 1972, which consisted of an introduction by Foulkes, lectures, and already a large group. Foulkes was interested in every new development.
My first encounter with SH Foulkes was in '63 at an intensive workshop, a block, he was conducting in Palanza, Italy. I enjoyed very much his personality and his ability to identify the links between separated phenomena and processes. And I decided to invite him to Israel. In '65, Foulkes, together with his wife, Elizabeth, came to Israel, and for a few months, he worked intensively with 5 groups of psychologists from different centers in Israel. I had the chance, as the supervisor of the centers, to participate in all the sessions. His way of conducting a group was a non-sophisticated one. The search for clarity in what seems complex, the ability to be tolerant to aggression, as well as interest and empathetic understanding of divergent position. His work has a decisive effect on the staff, as well on my strong belief in preparing psychologists for group therapy intervention. After '65, I often visited London, and I remember well a large group session when members of the GAS were able to discuss in Foulkes' presence what will happen after his death. His openness and his self-assurance, his concern for others, and for the group analytic approach were the basic conditions for such an atmosphere. When I came back in '72 from the United States, I told him about my personal experiences with the different new group methods. Foulkes related to my experience in Gestalt, nude, encounter groups, or in psychoanalytically oriented groups, with the curiosity of a child, a creative child. He tried to understand them in the context of the spirit of the time, both in the United States and in the world. In one of my visits at his home, Foulkes referred to the criticism of Emanuel Schwartz from the Graduate Center of New York on group analysis. In our discussion, it was very clear that Foulkes related to criticism by trying to understand it. As the inability and unwillingness to learn anything new. His second step was a positive, powerful act of explanation of his own perspective in a total avoidance of a sterile controversy. How? By writing a new paper. On that occasion, Foulkes gave me the final draft of this paper, The Group as Matrix of Individuals' Mental Life. This paper presented not only a powerful analysis concerning the anxieties and defenses against a comprehensive view, but became, for me, one of most beautiful papers about the mind. So, Foulkes changed an argument based on Schwartz's misunderstanding and confusion between group dynamics and the American movement of group dynamics to an act of creativity, his new paper. That evening, I left London with a gift from Foulkes. His suggestion to call both the unconscious and the conscious levels of the group self, as revealed in my research with MIPG methodology, the trans-self.